Welcome to the National Pulse. I'm Raheem Kassam, Editor-in-Chief of thenationalpulse.com. Today I've got a lot of data on my hands. I'm going to walk you through some of it in this segment here. We've also got Ellen Swenson, Chief Data Analyst at the Election Integrity Project. That's not the Transition Integrity Project. These are actually the good guys. Ellen will be joining us very shortly, and Darren Beattie to talk through some of the details of what he's been sharing on social media and what's on revolver.news in recent days. Also, all very important stuff. And let's start right here, right on the table in front of me. I want you to see this. I want the cameras to pick all of this stuff up. I have in my hands a document that just landed with me. It's called Pennsylvania 2020 Voting Analysis Report. Now, this is a very important report that's been put together by statisticians, physicists, mathematicians, and people who are non-partisan. In fact, it says so in the first opening gambit of this report, that this is not made by anybody who necessarily cares either way about the result, but rather this is an attempt by real mathematicians to get to the bottom of what happened at this last election. Now, I will say this. Let's turn back here. I will say this about this report, is that it is not conclusive in the sense of you can't prove things with numbers alone, right? But I want to go through some of this with you live on air right now. And as I say, I've only basically just received this and gone through it in the last 45 minutes. But I wanted to read you some of this stuff. And look, I know who these people are. I vetted these people themselves weeks or a week ago. So this is not just some report that's landed on my desk and I'm going to read it to you. However, the sum total of about a week plus work on this by people who are known to me, as many people who have been paying attention to me, to this show, to our social media feed will know, we put out an open call for statisticians about, was it the day after the election now? I wonder even if we remember what day it is here. So let's start. I want to start on page 15 of this report and walk you through what some of that. I mean, a lot of it is mathematical, statistical, graphs, charts, things that for somebody who was, I wouldn't say I was bad at math at school. I actually was in the top set of maths in my school, but I never went into a mathematics profession for a reason. So they break it down for us in words that people like I can understand. And on page 15, as they're going through some of the analysis of Pennsylvania counties, specifically talking about Allegheny and Philadelphia here, and 10 counties used to create a linear regression, i.e. to understand where the line of best fit is. The paragraph from this statistician says this. This means that the number of Biden votes in 10 of the outlier counties was 101% of registered Democrat voters versus the majority of other Pennsylvania counties where it was 70+%, an extraordinary statistical difference that is not logical or reasonably explainable legally. The most likely explanation, pay very close attention here, the most likely explanation is that excess votes were added to the Biden total that did not come from voters. I want to be very clear and careful about this again, as I stated at the beginning of this segment. By no means am I saying that this is absolutely correct. These are the findings of a set of statisticians and mathematicians who are PhDs, who are very well revered in their respective fields. And we can go on to page 90, to something that really stuck out at me. Now, this report was from 3 separate doctors, statisticians here, and it talks about mathematical evidence of fraudulent activity. And the paragraph states, The Biden vote change over Hillary Clinton's vote in 2016 in Montgomery County, Pennsylvania, shows a mathematically fraudulent result that is adding votes unnaturally to the tail of the distribution. High turnout or massive changes in voter preferences cannot statistically create this result in any reasonable probability. The signature is mathematical evidence of a classical form of fraud called stuffing the curve. The 2008 subprime mortgage risk management meltdown is a recent example of this fraud. It goes on, specifically an actor is adding Biden votes in heavy Democratic districts in excess of the real result, with the assumption that the addition will not be noticed due to the already high Dem-Rep ratio. And I want you to see what they mean here. This, you see, is the stuffing of the tail. That's on page 19 of this report. Now, if you're watching this and you're saying, Raheem, okay, this is all well and good, but I want to go through all of this myself, well, you will be able to. The reason Natalie Winters is not in the chair next to me today is she is working on making sure that this report is publicly available as soon as possible. Now let's turn to page 22. Another report, another three-person authored report here. The executive summary right at the top says, and this is a testable hypothesis of fraud using a predictive model in the Pennsylvania 2020 presidential vote for Allegheny County. And it says, the facts suggest a mathematically extraordinary event occurring in multiple counties simultaneously at a magnitude well above what is needed to change which candidate won Pennsylvania's electoral votes. A predictive model hypothesizes up to 30,500 plus fraudulent votes in Allegheny County alone. We'll stick to this. Ellen Swenson from the Election Integrity Project, the chief data analyst, will be joining us in the next segment. Stick around here on the National Pulse. We've got a lot more of this to go through. Hit up thenationalpulse.com in the break. I'll see you in a second. Welcome back to the National Pulse. I realize we sprinted in that first segment, and there's plenty of reasons to do that. Firstly, we've got a phenomenal guest who's waiting to join us on the line now, so I had to rip through as much information coming out of these reports as possible. I know that we have a National Pulse, for those of you that don't know, we have a National Pulse membership thing, which you can join at fundrealnews.com, and part of that is being part of a private Discord chat channel, and I've got it up on the computer in front of me here so that I can see our members' live responses, kind of like a live chat for this show. And somebody just responded, doing God's work with such limited personnel. Thank you, guys. And I'm glad that somebody has noticed that on a skeleton staff of 2 at max 3 of us a day, we're trying to get through as much of this information and data and bring it to you as quickly as possible. There's no time to waste. You don't get these moments back, as I like to say. Speaking of which, let's get straight on to our guest here, who's going to break news live on air with us here as well. So I thought I'd come onto this show today. Ellen Swenson from the Election Integrity Project, the chief data analyst. I thought I'd come on and break some news, but we're going to break some more news right now. Ellen, in the immediate aftermath. Well, let me take this back even further, just as a second. I had Nigel Farage, the leader of the Brexit Party, down the line on this show in August, and at the time he said, on the night of the election, it's going to look like President Trump has won. He said, but then people will go to sleep and wake up in the morning and lots of ballots will have been added to the final totals. He was absolutely right. So I called him up the day after the election. And I said, right, now what do they do? Because there's all sorts of theories about what's gone on here. Now what do they do? And he said to me, Raheem, they need to put boots on the ground, knocking on people's doors, specifically going to nursing homes and people in low-income neighborhoods and saying, hey, has somebody tried to buy your ballot? Has somebody tried to harvest your ballot? Has any funny business gone on? Because, you know, we're here to check up on that. And that's specifically what I recommended the Trump campaign do in the immediate aftermath. Ellen, it's what I believe you're going to tell us your group has been doing.
Yes, thank you, Raheem. I'm with Election Integrity Project California, but also we have an arm in Nevada, Election Integrity Project Nevada, and I'm the chief analyst for both of those organizations. Right now, we're doing a lot in California, believe me, but right now we're focused today, or to talk to you about, is what we're doing in Nevada. In July, we reported 55,000 registrants on the Nevada rolls, which is about 3% of their total voters, who have not voted or updated in 10 or more years. Some of them have never voted. So we believe they're probably died or moved away, and especially Vegas is a very transient place, so that wouldn't be surprising. But they still were all mailed ballots. In fact, some of them are inactive status and were still mailed ballots in Clark County. Of those, so far the data we have indicates that 8,000 of those 15,000 have actually voted in this election. And so what we do is we're having boots on the ground, like Nigel and you discussed, actually going door to door, knocking on those doors to find out if we have our boots on the ground knows the last time that person voted and then that they voted, in the recent election. Some of these people voted 20 years ago and they suddenly voted, which is very suspicious. I'm not saying they can't do that. It could be that this has a high turnout election, so people, some of these might be legit. So far, and I just only have a handful I've seen I can talk about so far, I have maybe a dozen of these signed witness statements from the people at those residents who say that person never lived here or that person moved away 5 years ago. And these are people who answer the door to our workers and were willing to sign an incident report that that person does not live at that address. The question we have is, hearing all these stories about maybe ballots either made up, physical ballots falsified, or counts added that don't have a ballot associated. Our question is, do those individuals really get a ballot, although they don't live there anymore, and actually vote it, which would be unlawful potentially? Or is that big batch of 15,000 being used to what we call internally stash votes? So in other words, when you have a count, let's say of 10,000 ballots that were supposedly received, you have to have a list of 10,000 people, registered voters, with a check mark next to their names, each of them, so that, then you can account for that 10,000 people really voted, one man, one vote. So if there's a need to actually find people, to assign that fake vote to, that 15,000 list would be where you could do it. And we have fought in California and in Nevada now to not mail ballots to those people and clean up that list. California has 458,000 of those people, but it's a much bigger state. It's about the same percentage though as Nevada. So it's a nice big, almost a big, bushel or basket of possible places that you could stash votes. I'm not saying it happened, but it's something that the campaigns should look at.
Should have been looking at since, from day one. Should have been looking at 2 years ago. Should have been looking at a year ago. I don't know you don't have the answers to this, Alan, but my concern has been, while the Transition Integrity Project, a group that's obviously tried to steal a lot of thunder from 2/3 of your organization's name, while they were going out there last November and recruiting, Republicans like Michael Steele and Republicans like Bill Kristol to their causes, because that's when they actually set up their first war game scenario. Where was the Republican opposition? Where were they doing the investigation into what was going on? Where were their intelligence operatives on the other side? And why weren't they deploying countermeasures to combat a lot of this? That's obviously a question that needs to be posed in the long run. But I want to recap as well. We've got to go to a break in about a minute. And just to recap what you've been telling us in this segment here is that you have identified several thousand people out of a batch of people who are believed to not be living anymore in the state of Nevada, sent these ballots, voted using these ballots, presumably haven't voted in some cases for 20 years, and now you've seen at least a dozen, having gone and knocked on some doors, seen at least a dozen people who are signing witness statements to say that person doesn't live here, that ballot was never cast from here, whatever it is. You've also got the problem, though, Ellen, and I guess we'll pose this question to you after this break, since we're up on it now. You've also got the problem of the people who won't for whatever reason, maybe they actually do fancy Biden, maybe they do lean left, maybe they just don't want to get involved, maybe they don't want the repercussions on them, who have experienced things like this, but who won't actually come forward. So it's even more important that people get out there and talk to their neighbors, especially in these swing states and these battleground states, and say, hey, did you see anything funny going on? And you know where to come if they did. We'll be back with more National Pulse after the break. Welcome back to the National Pulse. I want to bring you some of the scenes that the media refuses to show over the course of this hour. Stick around. We'll bring you some of those images from Washington, D.C. over the course of this weekend. And as far as I know, at the time we went to air today, in this hour, Joe Biden has still not condemned the violence that was done in his name this weekend, nor has he been asked by the mainstream media to condemn the violence that was done in his name this weekend. So here I am doing it. Joe Biden, Kamala Harris, Nancy Pelosi, senior Democrats. Your side attacked people. Where are you? And if this was Trump supporters attacking people, there would be throngs of activist reporters lined up outside 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue demanding the president condemn this atrocity. We'll go back now to Ellen Swenson. She's the chief data analyst at the Election Integrity Project. Breaking some real news on this show today. Ellen, talk to us more about what's taking place as far as your organization and your investigations are concerned, because I've got mounds of data in front of me that I'm going to be going through over the course of the day, publishing on the National Pulse website. What are you guys focused on now here? There you go.
Okay, so one thing I didn't mention in the earlier segment, which is really important as we go forward in Nevada and also in other states, is that if these people, let's say, voted unlawfully, or if their signature was copied, unlawfully, or if they didn't vote at all, and that the vote history was just stashed in the data, and there's actually no ballot, we'd find all that out by actually reviewing the signatures on the ballot return envelope. So get all these people who voted by mail, who supposedly, and who hadn't voted in many years, and have the campaigns request those and review those signatures. And if there's no ballot envelope, then we know something. If there's a ballot envelope with a mismatched signature relative to that voter's signature in the data, then we'll know that their ballot matching standards are very poor. Or if the ballot matches perfectly, that person might have voted unlawfully, they don't live there anymore. That's maybe a little bit more scattered. But the campaigns need to look at the signatures on those envelopes across the country, in disputed areas. And I understand that. I think it's Georgia. They're not allowing the viewing of the actual signatures, comparing them to the lawful signature in the voter registration file. And that tells me that they're hiding something. But I think this could be done easily in Nevada and other states.
So, Ellen, I want to get into some of the stuff. I don't know how much you're focused on. I know you've got California, I know you've got Nevada. I want to get into the broader picture here, because we had you on before the election a couple of times. You've been absolutely a fan favorite because you deal in detail. But let's pull out of the hyper-specific, which you've given us already, to a wider picture here. Now, I know you guys are not trying to, you're not a partisan organization. So I want to try and understand from you, as far as all of these battleground states are concerned, whether it's Michigan, Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, and beyond, what does the Election Integrity Project and what do you, as the chief data analyst there, think went on at this election in a broad sense?
It's hard for me to say without perfect proof, but I have a big question about the counting machines. we work at the granular level. This person's dead and they voted, or this person, voted and they shouldn't have. I think my gut is, and again, I don't have proof, but I'm hearing it from the new media and people like Sidney Powell, for example, that it's a much bigger number and a bigger issue than what we right now do. So I think it's in the counting machines. It's potentially in, like we said, making up ballots and then throwing them through the counter and then stashing those into the voting histories. I think it's something big like that. That's my gut. And unfortunately, I don't have the ability to really look at that information. That's not my area of expertise. Sure. But I can provide evidence, and we have provided some evidence to the campaign on the cross-state voting, for example. And then on this, what we talked about today, we will be providing that evidence if requested.
Well, I would love to be able to publish some of that and get it some more eyes when you guys are ready to put it out there. But Ellen,
one problem we have, one limitation, is we can't share the actual data with anybody unless we get a court order or a Department of Justice order, or the Secretaries of State allow us to share that with the campaign. We can show them what we have, but there are limitations on what we can do, especially when we're accusing someone of potentially unlawful voting. We're not going to put that name out there or that list out there.
Sure.
But we was waiting for a court order or the Secretaries of State, which is doubtful, to allow us to release this. But we're doing everything we can within our contracts and within the law.
And when you say the voting systems, I'm looking at one of the stories that we got up this morning over at the National Pulse. Dominion Voting Systems Manager, now Democrat mayor in Michigan. And it talks about this person, Mikhail Garrett, who worked at Dominion from 2017 to 2019 and immediately after began working at Michigan's Democratic Party headquarters as a deputy director before launching her own career in public office. Again, this isn't over the course of 20 years. This is over the course of about 3 to 4 years we're talking about. Is that what you mean when you talk about the counting systems? Because you seem like a very level-headed person. Your hair's not on fire. You're not waving your arms everywhere. You talk in the detail. But the media would have me believe that you're talking about the systems, that you're a wild conspiracy theorist.
Mm-hmm. Well, again, I don't have the evidence, but what I'm hearing is that there's very solid evidence of something wrong. Also, you see that these people, I think Biden's team hired maybe somebody who's associated with Dominion.
Yep.
That's why I've been reading. I have a concern that there's just more going on here than is that we know.
Yep.
And I can see, but here's the beauty of it. Every vote has to be attached to a warm body who voted. So we need to...
Yeah, it's about finding that out. It's about finding that out, and you guys are doing an amazing job of it. Ellen, please tell people, because there are all sorts of people who are watching this show right now. We've got about 10 seconds here. Where can they go to donate?
Okay, we are at Election Integrity Project California is our main website. It's EIP-ca.com. And on that website, you can also link and click Nevada.
We got to bounce. I'll tell them all after the break. Thank you, Ellen. Well, welcome back, and welcome to the people who have gone to thenationalpulse.com in the break and signed up to support our work. There is a link at the top of the page. It's thenationalpulse.com/support. It's fundrealnews.com, because that's what we do here, is we do real news. Real news, real data, real mathematics. You heard from Ellen Swenson in the last thing. Not conjecture, but evidence-based analysis of what's going on here. We also do things that the media doesn't do. We show you the images of things that were taking place this weekend that are just devastating to watch. Now, I can only imagine how devastating it is to watch as a lifelong DC resident. I can only imagine how devastating these scenes are, and we can put them up, how devastating they are to watch as an American. I'm not a lifelong DC resident. I'm not an American, but I bring you bad tidings from Europe. You know, I was in the Plot Against the President movie. I was in the Antifa Rise of the Black Flags movie, which I seriously recommend to all of you. Not just because I'm in it, but also because I'm in it. But the reason I did those things, the reason I wanted to take part, was because I've seen this movie before. We've seen it in London, we've seen it in Frankfurt, we've seen it on the streets of Paris, we've seen it in Spain, in Italy, in Greece. We've seen them trying to do it in Hungary, we've seen them trying to do it in Poland. What this is nothing less than Bolshevism, than totalitarian, dictatorial, heavy-handed, in your face, they want you dead Bolshevism. In Washington, D.C. this weekend, hundreds of thousands of supporters of the still duly elected President of the United States, they gathered en masse in Freedom Plaza. Think of the irony. In Freedom Plaza, they were attacked. On New York Avenue, they were attacked. On 14th Street, they were attacked. On K Street, they were attacked. Near DuPont Circle, they were attacked. Outside the White House, they were attacked. And who are the attackers? Black Lives Matter, a Marxist, revolutionary terror faction. That's what they were doing. They were terrorizing people because of their politics. They were beating people up because of their politics in order to get a certain demand fulfilled because of their politics. That's political terrorism. Crime, terrorism. And Antifa, an organization with its roots in Marxist Europe that has for so very long, decades upon decades, used the threat of force and violence and terror to try and get their way, to try and stop the other side, to try and succeed in a lot of ways, in a lot of countries, at pushing through Bolshevism, at pushing through communism. Now, I come from a country that right now is in the throes of throwing away something that 17.4 million people voted for in the greatest democratic exercise that my country has ever experienced. You will know it as Brexit. It wasn't always called Brexit, by the way. Back in the early 90s, it was a pure pipe dream, polling at about 3%, and over the course of decades, people like Nigel Farage, the good foot soldiers at the UK Independence Party, Eurosceptics within the British Conservative Party, they worked long and hard to convince people that our nation's best interest was not in a globalist superstate. And on June the 23rd in 2016, we won. But that victory was challenged in the courts, that victory was challenged on the streets. And over the years since, we have seen the far left of what they call the Socialist Worker Party in the United Kingdom become more and more emboldened, but not just them. No. See, they can't get their hands on the wheel unless the globalists give it to them. And there is a globalist in Downing Street right now. Yes, there's one called Boris Johnson. But there's another one called Carrie Symonds. And Carrie Symonds is somebody that I know very well. Carrie Symonds used to knock on my bedroom window on her way to work every morning, wanting to have a chat and hang out. And I know that Carrie Symonds is a nefarious force. Carrie Symonds is the Prime Minister's fiancée. She is not a member of the government. She doesn't have a formal role in 10 Downing Street, leading the United Kingdom. No. But this week, she saw to it that Dominic Cummings, known as Britain's Bannon to a lot of people, just to kind of simplify it, well, she got him fired. He was the one that was trying to help lead Britain out of the European Union. And I have some problems with Dominic Cummings. Just I have some problems with Bannon. Ask him. But Carrie Symonds wants the Green New Deal for Britain. Carrie Symonds wants the World Economic Forum's Great Reset for Britain. Carrie Symonds wants Britain to rejoin the European Union. And that's why I can speak to you with, at least with the authority of experience, sitting here before you, America, and saying, you have to do something. And I know that they're beating up families and scaring children and abusing women on the streets of Washington, D.C. And it's disgusting. But that's why every red-blooded American needs to stand up right now, get out there and do their duty. And I'm not calling for violence, no. I'm calling for a defense. A defense of what makes this country still the greatest republic mankind has ever known. We'll be back with Darren Beattie in a moment. Welcome back to the National Pulse. Well, Natalie Winters informs me that she is going through this report page by page. If we can actually go to camera 2 here, I just want to show people the amount of things we're dealing with here that have come to us in the last couple of hours, and we're going through it page by page in order to bring you the latest information as it pertains to the election. So, with that in mind, I just want to remind you that this is information that's being brought to us by PhD statisticians, mathematicians, and I've been going through some of it before the show today. And I just want to, before we bring on the next guest, talk to you about page 23 of this report, which talks about the mathematical evidence of fraudulent activity. Allegheny County specifically, it says, initial analysis was a bit of a surprise, as instead of stuffing the tail, or rather instead of a stuffing the tail attack, as in Montgomery County, this was a stuffing the everything kind of behavior, with all precincts game for adding Biden counts. The visualization above suggests it's not straight multiplier like Milwaukee, that's on another report, and it must be additive. It's a lot to go through here. I'm going to bring on Darren Beattie from Revolver.news. You'll recognize Darren from the War Room Show. He's been on with us a bunch, but never with hair so wild. Darren, you're looking more and more like Steve Bannon every day. Welcome to the show.
Thank you. Good to be here.
I don't have Darren's audio in my ear, but I can hear him through the bleed in the production room. Darren, let's start at the top here, because I wanted to have you on today because of what you had been tweeting about sort of an autopsy, really, about where this campaign has been, where it's gone, what it's achieved. And I am in great agreement with you. I was in great agreement with something that you mentioned on the War Room Show the other day when you talked about the tens of millions that had been poured into things like the Blexit movement, but not really enough attention paid to the white working class voters who really are the Trump base. And then I was wondering how long it would take for you to follow up with what was the logical next step or hand-in-hand point as far as I was concerned. And I sort of referred to it as an Aristotelian perspective on all of this. This is about the elites, the political elites in this country and, of course, globally. So when you tweet that it's not about the erasure of the elites, does that mean you, Darren Beattie, is saying that you believe in an elitism? And let's just explain for the audience where we're coming from with this.
Right. Well, I think the tweets that you're referring to basically made the following point, that you hear a lot of people promoting a kind of branding of the Republican Party as a party of the working class. And I'm very sympathetic to that branding. I simply pointed out that this is a necessary but not sufficient condition. For a successful political party or movement, I believe very firmly that you need at least one faction of the elite behind you. And if you can't get a faction of the elite, then you at least need to be appealing and attractive to an emerging elite of young and talented and relentless and fearless people. And without that component, I fear that a party simply of the working class cannot prevail against coordinated elite opposition.
I think it's a very astute observation, Darren, because I think it's something and as somebody who comes from a much more class-based country than the United States is, or at least it was once that way, I can attest to the benefits of a structure like that. Not to say that one is even above the other, but that there are differing elements that lend differently towards getting the points across. And one of the things, let's put it into practical terms, that we saw at this past election was that there were very few of the grass tops that were coming out in favor, not just of President Trump, but of President Trump's agenda. Actually, I feel like we almost had more of that in 2016. So is that what you're talking about? Having our own kind of internal, whether it's party or movement based, intellectual framework, intellectual undergirding that actually was kind of cast asunder by a lot of President Trump's closest advisors post-Bannon.
Right. Well, I think it would take a while to fully describe what I mean, but
we got time.
There are a couple of really key components of this. I think one issue is simply branding. So as with any brand or company or anything like that, one way to kind of assess one's branding is if your brand or company or political party were an actual party, what would it look like and who would come? Would it be something, in a dive bar somewhere with kind of unattractive and unkempt people, like people with this crazy kind of hair? Or would it be something that is very popular with, models and attractive people and exciting things going on?
You're talking about me.
Right. Naturally. And so that's a very important question to ask, is to really have a kind of an aesthetics. And by aesthetics, I don't simply mean like a logo and branding, but the full spectrum of how a party or movement presents itself that can resonate with kind of upwardly mobile, aspirational, educated people. I think you need that as part of a successful movement. And that's one component of what I mean about appealing to an emergent elite. There's another component that I mean, and this gets into the fact that I think a lot of politics, not just in the United States, this is a universal claim, but a lot of politics, especially in the United States, at the retail level, is really downstream from intra-elitist disputes at the top that are not necessarily transparent to the public. And I think that, basically so much of politics is downstream from energy, the geopolitics of energy. So that's a huge thing. Energy, resources, and other things. And those create elite factions. And I think a successful retail level political movement has to successfully kind of capture the interests of one of those elite factions as a matter of kind of resource dominance, whatever you want to call it, in order to be successful at the retail level.
Darren, stick around. We want to be right back. I want to drill down more into this with you. It sounds very Scrutonian to me, which, as far as I'm concerned, can only be a good thing. Darren Beattie of Revolver.news, Raheem Kassam here at the National Pulse. Return with you in just a moment. So much madness going on out there, and in addition to some of the websites you hear about on this show, such as thenationalpulse.com and of course our good friends at Citizen Free Press, I do highly recommend, in fact I demand of you, that you make a favorite of revolver.news. It's an incredible site, great aggregator. President Trump's tweeted about it several times. And Darren often has just amazing analysis over there at revolver.news. The headlines right now, they would blow your mind if you were looking at this 3 years ago, 5 years ago, 10 years ago. You look at some of the headlines on this thing about MailChimp deplatforming groups, about WordPress deplatforming groups, about ACLU lawyers cheering suppression. You would have seen this 5 years ago and thought, wow, somebody's got a really active imagination. Unfortunately, I can also report to you that MailChimp, which is an email distribution service, has also suspended the National Pulse. And they didn't even write to us and tell us that they were doing it. No, we were told by one of the activists who has been harassing MailChimp for some weeks now to remove us. We were told by her on Twitter that they had. Now, I'm not naive enough to have stored all of my data on one service, on MailChimp alone, and I'm certainly not naive enough to use MailChimp on a day-to-day basis to mail out our subscribers. But there are people out there, volunteer groups, who probably are not naive, but they are volunteering. They don't have the time like I do to think through all of the ramifications, to invest in all these different platforms, and to make sure that they have backups. And for them, groups such as the Virginia Tea Party group, that's an existential problem. They can't talk to their subscribers anymore, the people that have signed up for their list. They may not be able to tell them where events are taking place, where protests, where demonstrations, where meetings, where speaker events, where social events are taking place. Because MailChimp, once it shuts you down, they don't actually allow you to access your own data again. So unless you're backing up regularly, as we do here, you're screwed. I didn't plan to talk about that, but it just came out after seeing the revolver.news homepage. Darren Beattie joins us back here. Now, Darren, I agree with you. An aesthetic is imperative to the future of the party. I think having, bringing a reliable, thoughtful, intelligent, America First elite into the fold is incredibly important. It's something that I've wanted to do for a long time. A couple of years ago, I dabbled with the idea of setting up a think tank called the Westphalian Institute to really house the best thinkers on our side. So I want to ask you about that, because there are plenty of organizations and groups, and you don't have to badmouth them. I will, such as the Heritage Foundation, and others that are happy to take $80 million from the conservative movement. And what do we get in return for it? Is we get big fancy buildings on Massachusetts Avenue that fly very pretty flags and host wonderful drinks receptions for their interns. But as soon as Biden won, in inverted commas, as soon as that happened, what did the Heritage Foundation do? They put out a report that said, hey, by the way, endless wars might not be such a bad thing after all. I don't know if you saw that one, Darren. But tell us more about what needs to happen in order to institutionalize, as I've said for the last 4 years, to institutionalize America First.
Right. No, that's a great question. And I think we're so attentive now to the election and electoral drama that I think we often forget that I think the right even ascribes an inordinate importance to winning elections as such. And we really need to build up infrastructure that has nothing to do or little to do with the election process per se, so that when we do win elections, it actually can be more effective. And what you reference about the Heritage Foundation, absolute disaster, without any kind of exaggeration or self-promotional bias. We would have been so much better off if everyone who had donated to Heritage gave half of it to National Pulse, half of it to revolver.news. It would have been orders of magnitude more effective. The idea of giving money to the Heritage Foundation or even the Republican Party, for instance, I think is largely a waste of money. I want to get back to what you said about MailChimp, by the way, because you referenced some journalist that was harassing and who got their organization banned. What if there were $100 million treasure chest whose sole purpose was to impose costs on these very types of harassment journalists, or people like Brandy Zadrozny, whom I've exposed on Revolver, and Tucker Carlson, who makes a living off of uncovering the private information of Trump supporters and ruin their lives. What if there were $100 million war fund dedicated to imposing commensurate costs on these people, these so-called journalists who are really neo-Stasi commissars who make a living off of ruining people and inconveniencing people like you for your mailing list and so forth? I think that would be 1,000,000 times more effective than anything the Heritage Foundation has done.
Yeah, Darren, I think that's absolutely correct. We're up against the end of the show here, Darren. But you're like Samson. The longer your hair gets, the stronger you seem to be. Give us an idea of what you're going to be doing, focusing on the next couple of days. What's coming out of Revolver.news?
Well, follow the Revolver.news for the latest on election stuff. But we're following an increasingly disturbing trend of the national security apparatus being repurposed domestically to suppress the energies associated with Trump's victory. It's a deeply disturbing trend, and we're on that beat like no one else. So stay tuned for some explosive material on the Color Revolution Network and other nefarious components of the national security community.
He's called it in the past. He's going to call it again. Darren Beattie over at Revolver.news. Thank you for joining us here on the National Pulse.
Thank you very much.
All right, in the minute we have left, I couldn't agree with Darren more about what he's talking about that war chest. And I actually talked to a lot of people. We have our membership thing, and we've got 645 active subscribers as of this moment who help us out with $10 a month to keep the site up, to keep Natalie Winters paid, to keep the scoops coming, to keep us in printer paper so that we can go through these reports. But it's nowhere near where some of these big, august and aged conservative movement organizations are. And I think that there's enough people out there now and enough new money out there now for us to have a real America First institutionalization. So if you want to talk to me, make sure you head over to fundrealnews.com. You can sign up. We chat in the live chat about these kind of things every day in the Discord private chat. And I want to help you guys. I know there are so many out there who just want to do more for their country. You could host a fundraiser. You could bring other people into the fold. Email your friends. We'll be back tomorrow at 3 p.m.